Imagine a country where you have free access to social services, healthcare, education, and much more. If you ever face a problem, you can just call the police and make a report, right? You have an active say in the political direction taken by a country, and you can engage in its social and political debates. You can say no if you don't want to interact with someone and just call yourself a taxi back home. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? Now imagine the same exact life without being able to make yourself understood because you don't speak the language. Education, no access. Healthcare, well, with a bit of luck, there will someone be there who can interpret for you. Public authorities, don't even get me started here. They will tell you to go home and come back tomorrow. Now, my question is, would you be able to live like this? I know exactly how this scenario feels like for someone growing up in such a situation. I was born and raised as a daughter of a refugee Iranian Muslim family in Austria. Whose daily life was exactly like that. The language we spoke at home was Farsi, but not because that was what my parents had decided on, but because they had no other choice. Gaining a foothold as a refugee speaking only one language is hard. Let me tell you, it's life-changingly challenging. Growing up as someone with a Middle Eastern background in Europe meant one thing first and foremost for my parents. I would end up either as a doctor, a lawyer, an IT expert, or simply become unemployed. We might have some guests here in the audience who come from a Middle Eastern background as well, and who might know what I'm exactly talking about. Seriously though, when I completed school and when it was time for me to choose the right academic studies, my father gave me these 4 options and nothing else for my future. Somehow it was important to my parents that their kids would complete a decent education. It just had to be one of those careers. Now, I grew up speaking Farsi and German, with Farsi as my mother tongue and German as my language of origin. I would speak Farsi with my family and German with my friends. Every time I traveled to Iran as a child to spend time with my relatives, I was asked, "So, do you prefer life here in Austria or do you prefer life in Iran?" My relatives were basically asking me if Iran or Austria was my home. I was a child. I didn't really know what to answer. I mean, I didn't want to hurt anyone or disappoint my relatives. At the same time, I was wondering if a country could ever become my home if I had never even lived there. After all, Farsi was my mother tongue, the language in which I was brought up and in which I gained access to my family, to our community, and to our culture. So, when I told my parents, my father, that I wanted to pursue a career as an interpreter, he said, "وا، مطمئنی؟ چرا نمیخوای دکتر خانواده بشی?" He would say, "What? Are you sure? You don't want to become the doctor in our family? Why?" My family places a great importance on Persian traditions. So my mother prepared a Persian shrine called the Sofra Haftzin to celebrate the Persian New Year. It is customary to cover the table with items that start with the letter S, with 7 items that start with the letter S. For example, garlic symbolizes protection, and vinegar stands for patience and happiness. In Iran, the New Year is celebrated at the same time as we celebrate the beginning of spring in Europe. So It was that we would decorate the table on New Year's Day and ring in the Persian New Year as a family in Vienna. So, hold on. Which culture is my culture now? Am I an Austrian-Iranian? Am I an Iranian-Austrian? Which New Year was my New Year? Now, it was only possible for me to connect with my family and my culture because of this one shared language that we had. My mother said that when I was a young child at home, I would repeat what other people would say on TV, learning my first words of German in the process. I quickly developed an independent personality in German, and I saw it as a separate facet of myself. Growing up with a second language helped me to reflect on the cultural values my parents had given me from a whole new perspective. I started to like my voice in German. It made me feel more grown up and more independent. Somehow, my identity could spread its wings in German and exist more freely. Now, have you ever wondered in which language you can swear without discomfort and without feeling guilty? Have you asked yourself in which language you hype yourself up to face the day on a Monday morning? In which language do you dream? I had the privilege of learning German from a very young age, so it felt clear to me that I would one day become an interpreter. Since I already had these language abilities and this cultural knowledge, it just felt natural to me that I should seek to do something with them. Although I myself learned in my family what not being able to communicate owing to language barriers really means, it was not until I worked as a social counselor that I really got to understand what impact language gaps can have on people and their mental health. Being able to understand what you hear at the doctors or in the streets is taken for granted by so many people. And by just as many people though, it's an obstacle. We might live in a country where we have all these services, but they're not accessible to everyone. One particular story had a great impact on the course of my career. In 2018, I was working in a women's advice center whose services were primarily aimed at female passing asylum seekers. Since I was a social counselor with Farsi as my mother tongue, I chiefly saw women from Iran and Afghanistan whom I was able to advise in their mother tongue. One specific woman had a very great impact on me. One day she came into our session with some medical reports and kindly asked me to translate the documents. As I read through the reports, I realized that no one really had told her about her terrible diagnosis. So for you to understand, she and her husband had been trying for years to get a baby, and they had finally managed to conceive. And what this lady was telling me was, the doctor said I cannot keep my baby, and I don't understand why. I'm happy that I finally got to become the mother I always wanted to be, and now I cannot keep my baby? Why? She didn't speak any German at all, so I asked her if an interpreter had been present for her. She said that by chance, there was another pregnant lady in the waiting room while she was talking to the doctor, so she decided to interpret for her. I asked myself, did she really translate everything? The two women didn't really know each other at this point. To make sure that her diagnosis could be properly explained to her, I organized an interpreter who would accompany her to her next doctor's appointment. On that day, I could feel her powerlessness faced with the situation. I wondered how I would have felt being at the doctor's and not being able to understand what he or she is telling me. Being unable to hear and make myself heard. Sadly, this story is not an isolated incident. It is the reality of many, many people who suffer discrimination because of language barriers. Not being able to make yourself understood or understand information leads to a significant lack of self-determination and personal freedom. Now, how can we give those people a chance to get a grasp of their own reality? How can we empower those voices? Now, here's what I did. Today, after 10 years of working experience as an interpreter, I run my own startup with the goal of using technology and digital tools to overcome language barriers more quickly and efficiently. We have developed a platform that allows remote interpreting by video. In 2021, I moved from my home city of Vienna to Switzerland to make my vision a reality. Create a world in which no one has to face discrimination anymore. Now, we have to understand why language is so important. Mastering a language and being understood comes from a deep desire for human connection. Whether that connection takes place within our family, a community, a culture, or a country. This is important when we as privileged native speakers talk about who we are as a nation. We as privileged native speakers have access to healthcare, social services, education, and so much more. So, how do we move towards a more inclusive society? If we stop seeing languages as a problem and start seeing them as a solution, we can overcome all these challenges and build bridges between two languages and two cultures. When we perceive these linguistic obstacles as an opportunity, we also seize the chance to not only get to know our counterparts better, but also ourselves. We can embrace our cultural lenses and learn more about other people's values and other people's cultures. Now, how do we build these bridges? Simply by becoming bridge builders. All it takes is the decision to reach out, to connect, and the will to understand. It starts with small yet meaningful actions, like engaging in conversations with those whose experiences differ from our own. If we were to view language as a chance, we understand that we can connect with people on a so much deeper level and we can build human relationships. Now, you don't need to embark on launching a startup like I did, but instead begin with small steps and watch how these small steps can turn into something very, very big. For example, volunteering. There is no better feeling than serving the community one lives in. So if you happen to speak 2 or more languages, use this skill, use this ability, and join forces with the people in your town. Create an environment that encourages people to talk openly. People are often more willing to express themselves when they feel comfortable, even if they're not fluent in a country's national language. Now, today, I am aware of my privileged status as someone who has grown bilingual. I might not have become a doctor or a lawyer or an IT expert, but I now really and truly feel at home because I have found a 5th life path for me, and that is interpreting. Because language is empowering and it's uniting. Now all we have to do is provide those bridges. Because at the end of the day, it can affect any one of us at any time. Thank you.